What if I told you that Disney was in the news yet again? Well, and Marvel along with that. I don't think you'd find that very surprising. And also, we've got a little bit of Superman news from the new Superman movie coming out and a new Riddick movie. Welcome back, guys. This is our second episode of Criticless Cast News. I'm super excited to be here and run through some stuff. The news today was a bit interesting because first thing this morning when I got up, it was just a bevy of Disney and Marvel news. And it feels like this is happening a lot right now. I think most of it is due to the fact of what recently happened with Disney and a bit of a mess that they had on their hands because of the whole stock and basically the restructuring internally possibly with what was going to happen because they were trying to push Bob Iger out. There's been a lot happening. If you haven't kept up with it, it's been a mess. So right now I think they're kind of in damage control mode, trying to make people more confident about what's going on over at Disney, which is kind of difficult to do because they haven't been doing that well. So the first thing that I wanted to touch on is that they're talking about cutting back on Marvel. Now, most of us, I think that that's a pretty good idea because it's been a bit of a mess ever since Civil War, or well, not even Civil War, but the Infinity Saga ended. It's just turned into a mess. Things got just really hairy for Marvel. They've been putting out really bad movies. A lot of the shows, it's kind of a 50-50 split. Half of them were okay, and then the other half were awful, actually awful, especially Echo. So, I mean, it's just not been looking good for them. And they were just banging these out. And the first year that they started doing shows on Disney Plus, they released like 5 shows in the same year. And we just got bombarded. And I think that that's what happened is that Bob Iger is now saying that they are going to pull it back and that they're going to cut back to no more than 3 movies a year and 2 shows per year. And this article by Variety kind of just paints out what Iger is saying right now, and that this is going to be a quality strategy for them over at Marvel. He says, we're slowly going to decrease volume and go to probably about 2 TV series a year instead of what had become 4, and reduce our film output from maybe 4 a year to 2 or a maximum of 3. And honestly, I mean, that makes sense. And I would hope that with them cutting back on the extreme amount of content that is clearly burning people out, that maybe we can get a quality increase. But a lot of the problems aren't even just due to how many things were coming out, but it's just the entire strategy of what they are going for with the MCU has just been an absolute whiff. And so the question is, with Deadpool coming out this year, the only Marvel property as far as a film coming out this year is Deadpool. So the question is, can Deadpool and an old Wolverine bring back this entire franchise? I mean, Marvel as a whole was putting out banger after banger year after year, and we thought they could do no wrong. And then all of a sudden, they came out and just crapped their pants in front of everybody. And interestingly enough, it wasn't just Marvel that did it, it was all of Disney. And it's just turned out to not be looking too hot for Disney as a whole, which is going to connect to the next 2 things that I'm going to mention. But I don't necessarily want to get too ridiculously deep into just because it's a lot of numbers and stocks. But basically, it sounds like Iger is pulling back and trying to course correct. But I mean, we've still got things like an Agatha show being made, which is a spinoff of WandaVision. Now, I loved WandaVision. I actually thought they did a really good job. But this is about a side character in WandaVision, and it is a Marvel character going back. But it's like, unless they really hit something perfect here with this show, people probably aren't going to care because this, once again, is a character that no one is passionate about. So it's like, okay, well, this character that's not necessarily having a whole bunch of fanfare is getting an entire show, and they're going to be one of 3 shows during a year. So is this the right move pulling back? Probably. But do they still have a better plan for what they're actually releasing? We don't know yet. Time will tell. So I'm curious to see what happens with them pulling back on the Marvel movie and show schedule. So we'll keep an eye on this stuff. Now, along with this came multiple stock bits of stock news connected to Disney. Now, like I said, Disney has been a mess, and they were looking at possibly getting Bob Iger overthrown after coming in by a man named Nelson Peltz was leading the charge. And one thing that I found interesting in this article, and it is a term that I have seen in article after article after article, is that they keep using this word, which is right here, and it says activist investor Nelson Peltz. Now, if you don't know who Nelson Peltz is, he's an old guy who owns stock in Disney, a lot of it. And the fact that they are calling him an activist investor, he was never an activist investor before. And actually, I would possibly call him an anti-activist investor, because what Nelson was trying to do is get activists out of Disney, inside of what is happening into the business end of Disney, because of the level of activism being pushed in their films, in the agenda, and the ideologies that are getting pushed in everything that is happening with Disney. And the problem is that Nelson wanted this stuff out, and therefore he became an activist, not actually a person coming after activists, potentially bringing down an entire mega company at this point. I mean, Disney owns so much. They own Marvel, they bought Fox, the list goes on and on as far as the things that they bought up over the years, including things like ESPN, which is actually mentioned in this article. So the article here, the title, Disney posts better than expected quarterly results, nears streaming profitability goal. So another thing that you might not know is that these streaming services are not doing well. Most of them have bought off more than they can chew, and they cannot afford to keep the doors open because they're having to churn out content that's extremely expensive, but they aren't bringing in the users that they need to float the amount of content that they're trying to push. So now it's from reading this article, and like I said, there's a lot of numbers. We'll put the link in the show notes, but essentially what they're saying here is that the revenue in the quarter is doing better than they were expecting, and that they think that it's getting to a point where they might actually be able to make money on their streaming services. But the interesting thing that jumped out to me the most here is that they do own ESPN Plus, and I missed this last year, but apparently last year, ESPN Plus had to report a loss of $659 million. Again, $659 million loss. And now they've brought those numbers down a little bit to a more modest $18 million loss. So they're considering this a bit of a win. Now, they are saying that, I guess, Disney Plus numbers are up and the projections are up because of Hulu and them owning that, and that being a streaming service as well. So we will see what happens here. But what we've noticed, if you've been watching all of this, is that the corporate press is really become a bunch of shills for Disney. And they are going to push whatever they can to make these numbers look good, because at the end of the day, with this whole Nelson Peltz thing, the media did not want him involved, because it meant that DEI was not going to get pushed in a lot of this Disney stuff, and the corporate media loves all that, and Nelson just wanted Disney to pull it out. And so they're going to back the fact that Nelson lost, quote unquote, and we're keeping the same regime that was currently in there. So we'll watch these actual real numbers and see what pans out after the end of the year. But Disney had not been doing well, which connects to the next article here from Variety, which is that their stock falls and they're blaming things on the parks as well, and they're actually even turning to some stuff saying that it's to do with the actual of COVID and people not showing up as much. And so the share has gone down, and it said that the stock was up 29% year to date on Monday. But then, and it says, while Disney's theme parks business drove top and bottom line growth for the first 3 months of 2024, with revenue growth of 10% and a segment operating income of 12%, the company said the June's quarter segment operating income is expected to come in roughly comparable to the prior. So, and like I said, right here, the second paragraph, the CFO here is trying to point to COVID stuff and that being a part of it and why people aren't showing up. But there's a whole lot more going on. And I think that this connects to Disney as a company in whole, and with all the stuff we were previously talking about. So I think if they don't get their crap together, this is going to continue to spiral. I think right now they are just kind of trying to polish up this turd and make it look good, because things haven't been going well. So we'll keep an eye on Disney. It's not a surprise that they're doing these like semi fluff pieces and trying to make people feel confident about what's happening in Disney after the previous deal that went the way that it did. So we'll keep a lookout for what's going on there. Now, to Superman. If you have not been paying attention, there is a new Superman movie coming out. I think pretty much everybody knows this is happening because the world imploded when we found out that our savior, Henry Cavill, was not going to be Superman anymore. And now this is the new guy. I am not familiar with David Corenswet, but obviously many of us are familiar with James Gunn, who is the director and came from Guardians of the Galaxy, and that's what really blew him up. And he's going to be spearheading everything over at DC. So this is a look. He shared this on Instagram and I think Threads. James, stop trying to make Threads happen. It's not going to happen. Just stop. But so here's the photo, right? I really dig it. Don't know if that's a hot take. I think it's freaking sweet. We've got a combination of multiple things going on here. And one of the things actually that I saw folks complaining about is the collar. Now, if you take a look, Superman has a collar on this suit going around his neck. This is something, it doesn't go up very high, but this is something that was popularized in the rebranding of the DC universe quite a few years ago, where they kind of redesigned and rebranded these characters, and it was the new 52 design is what they call it. If you take a look right here at this photo, you can see the collar, and it's very much what James Gunn is pulling on with this suit. And I think, it's looking kind of war torn, battle torn, and got some like dust and grime on it, which is pretty neat. It's not this overly shiny suit. Now, I'm sure that we will have both versions, but he's sitting here putting on his boots, and it's a neat look. He's got the look of Superman, and I don't mind this S. It's a new kind of take on the look of that. And then also the big thing that other folks are pointing out here is his crotch region. So take a look here. If you zoom way in, you can tell that this is actually red, which harkens back to the old school Superman and what we like to dub as the underoos. It's got the red Superman underwear. So I think that that's pretty rad. We're pulling from some new ideas, some old ones. It even has some of the vibe of Cavill's suit too, with just the material and the textures. And I like it. He's got the hair, he's got the whole thing. So I'm curious to see where this goes. I mean, if he can do what we got with Cavill, or better, then I think we're in a good spot. So we'll see what James Gunn does. I mean, he is known for being an edgelord, so it just all depends on if he can convey this Boy Scout character properly. Can he give us a Boy Scout Superman that's not raunchy and nasty and over the top? I don't know, but time will tell. We're not, too terribly far out from this movie. Obviously, it's still in production, but it's chugging along. So I'm excited to see what happens. And the last bit of news that I wanted to touch on is this right here. And it's that we are getting a new Riddick movie, Riddick Furia. And it is apparently officially in production in Germany, Spain, and the UK. And it said that it's going to start filming on August 26th. Now, I am pretty excited about this because I think that this series is pretty awesome. It started out with Pitch Black all the way back in 2000. And this thing is actually streaming on looks like Peacock, if you want to go check that out. We haven't had many people review it in Criticless. This is an older film. I had a lot of fun with it back in the day, and it was low budget, made for like 20 or 30 million, and didn't do gangbusters in the box office, but got this cult following. Then they followed it up with The Chronicles of Riddick, which was like a really high budget movie, but didn't make back what it needed to because it cost so much. Then they toned it back and did a third film that actually did really well and made it at a lower budget. So maybe this will hit somewhere in the middle. I mean, this is a Vin Diesel franchise, so I mean, clearly he can still get people to show up for the Fast and Furious movies, so maybe he can get people to show up for this. It's been quite a while since we've had one of these, so I'm interested to see what they do. But in this press release, they did give us a brief synopsis, and what it says is Riddick finally returns to his home world, a place he barely remembers and one he fears might be left in ruins. But there he finds other Furians fighting for their existence against a new monster, and some of these Furians are more like Riddick than he could have ever imagined. So going back to his home world, that should be interesting. This is a very sci-fi series. It's based off a guy who can see in like black and white, or technically can't see at all. It's an interesting, I can't even, it's been so long since I've seen them, I hardly even remember, but they were a lot of fun. They were more of that R-rated sci-fi movie. So we'll see what happens with this. It could be really freaking cool. And I mean, Vin's getting a little older. We'll see if he can continue to generate, the buzz and people showing up in theaters that he used to be able to. But, hey, if you haven't seen this series or any of these movies, I would say check it out because I really dug them. And I mean, since the last one was all the way back in 2000, if you're younger, there's a good chance you didn't see these. And it's been a while since the last one. So, hey, give it a go. But guys, that's going to be it for today. This has been a fun one, and I'll see you back here tomorrow.